past 30 years, I think the court has given direction, and that there's been even public confidence in the court in resolving some of those politically loaded issues in those cases. It was a struggle for me to get articles when I finished my LLB. I could not get articles in Durban. I could not get articles in Joburg. If I say I applied to at least 100 firms, that's an understatement. At that time, I knew I had bigger battles to fight. I was appointed as a judge to an unwelcoming bench. Our society is going to be better.
Justice Theron, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. It is a pleasure to sit with you in particular because you have been on the bench for quite a while. It's an understatement.
Yes.
At African Law Matters, we are reflecting on 30 years of democracy and particularly the evolving role of the court. And one of the judgments for me that stands out whenever your name comes up is the Gumede case, right, where you ordered that women who are in customary marriages should have the same standing as other women, right? And I would like to know from you today what landmark cases or decisions stand out for you as particularly influential in shaping the trajectory of democracy and human rights in South Africa.
Well, let me first say it's a pleasure for me also to meet you and to be having this conversation with you about our democracy and the last 30 years and what we have achieved. Now, in terms of landmark cases, it's difficult to point to one or two. And what I thought I would do, I would look at each 10-year period to see and to try and choose a case, at least one that stood out for me. But I must also mention the first case that the Constitutional Court heard, the case of S versus Makwanyane, in which it abolished the death penalty. And I think what Chief Justice Chaskelson said when he explained how our Constitution works, and he says it works as a bridge. It keeps from the past only that which is defensible in order to create a new and a just and equal society. And I think that is the guiding light that the Constitution is and should be in our country. Now, if I have to choose one case, which is difficult, I would choose Bay versus the Magistrates of Khayelitsha, and that was in 2004. And that is where this court declared the rule of primogeniture, where only male descendants could inherit under customary law, unconstitutional. And it held that it discriminated on the basis of gender and of illegitimacy. If we have to go to the next 10 years, I would say it was the decision in the Economic Freedom Fighters versus the Speaker. And it's commonly referred to as the Nkandla judgment. I think it's a landmark case for accountability and for the rule of law. And the Constitutional Court said that the then president had contravened the Constitution by failing to implement the public protector's recommendations. And I think that's one of the cases that shows that nobody is above the law in South Africa, and that is how it should be. And I think if we look at what may have been significant, or for me what was significant, a case from the last 10 years would be New Nation Movement.
Love that one.
Yeah, where this changed the democratic landscape in our electoral system. And that was the system we had used since 1994. And the Constitutional Court said that the Electoral Act was unconstitutional because it didn't allow independent candidates to stand for election for the National Assembly and provincial legislatures. And it gave Parliament 2 years to amend the law.
Amazing. You know, I'm glad you finished with that last case because it talks about a case having to go back to Parliament to amend the law.
Yes.
And this is something that the court has to grapple with quite a bit, the separation of powers.
Yes.
So my next question would be, the Constitutional Court has had to hand our landmark judgments focus on the control of public power. For instance, in President of the Republic of South Africa and others versus South African Rugby Football Union and others in 1999, and the Executive Council of the Western Cape Legislature and others versus President of the Republic of South Africa and others in 1995. What stems from both of those cases is a delicate balance between respecting the separation of powers and holding government institutions accountable for their actions to ensure democratic governance. How is the Constitutional Court navigating that balance?
Let me start at the beginning. We are always mindful that the judiciary is one arm of government. And we're mindful of our role, and we're mindful of the separation of powers doctrine. So in every case that we decide, we are mindful of that. And it comes more to the fore where we have to perhaps set aside an act of parliament or an act of the president. But in those cases, the the doctrine of separation of powers is supreme in our mind. We don't lose sight of that. If we have to lose sight of that, then we would be overstepping. And I think what SAFU and the Western Cape legislature cases, what it underscores this court's commitment to ensuring that all branches of government operate within constitutional limits. Now, if we're going to call on other arms of government to operate within constitutional limits, then we must be the first example to do that.
Absolutely.
So we mustn't overstep because we're calling others into line. So it can almost be, the pot calling the kettle black. We mustn't be accused of that, and we're very much aware of that. And an important aspect of this court's approach is judicial deference. We respect the executive and the legislature's role in policy making, particularly in decisions requiring expertise or political discretion. We acknowledge that it's the masses who have put them into power and who have put them into power because they support their policy. And it's not about whether we like their policy or we don't like their policy. It's about respecting the roles of the three arms of government. But in saying that, we don't hesitate to say when any other arm or any other official has overstepped the boundaries. And we do the same in administrative law cases, in PAJA cases, where we craft remedies for restoring lawful governance, all the while respecting the separation of powers. In most cases, the court opts for remittal. And if you look at our jurisprudence, you will see that. We opt for remittal, we give Parliament a time within which to remedy the unconstitutionality. And where necessary, if there has to be an interim arrangement, then we propose an interim arrangement. And normally, it's not something that's initiated by us as well. It's the parties who would come to court and the parties who would offer also possible solutions that pending Parliament's action in rectifying this, these are the solutions that we propose. And sometimes we adopt what is called a reading in. So until Parliament remedies the defect, this is the way the legislation will be read. So it's a reading in or a reading down. So in that way, we try not to impose our will on the people or on the legislature.
That's very interesting. I also find it fascinating that you refer to judicial deference because, there have been criticisms that the court is a judicially active court. So I really appreciate that clarification from you. Now, the Constitutional Court is often described as a watchdog for the Constitution or the guardian of the Constitution. And the Constitution itself was created as the supreme protector of democracy and human rights. In what ways has it succeeded and failed at achieving its purpose? And what challenges has it faced?
I must start off by emphasizing that our Constitution holds great promise for our new society. And I refer back to what I said, actually what the then Chief Justice said in S versus Makwanyane, and that we retain from the past only what is defensible. And the Constitution, in fact, represents a break from the past. It represents a break from all that is racist, authoritarian, repressive. And it identifies a commitment to democratic universalization and the achievement of a constitutional democracy. So I think the Constitution stands as that beacon. It says this is where the past stops, this is where apartheid stops, and this is where we have a new beginning.
Would you consider it transformative in that regard? That's one of the words that one of the former chief justices would use.
No, it is transformative. So it's the framework for transforming our society.
Absolutely.
So it stands as that beacon. It is, if we think of a beacon and the ships are always going towards the beacon. So we should be aiming always to be achieving the rights, to be achieving the goals and the purposes that set out in our Constitution. And this is also why we say it's a living document.
Yes.
So it can cater for all times, and we won't achieve everything in a short time. And it will always be that beacon that we're striving for.
Absolutely. So in recent years, the Constitutional Court has increasingly been called upon to deal with high-profile, politically loaded cases. You have personally been on the bench in a number of these judgments. What are your views on the implications of such judgments or such cases on South Africa's democracy and the role that the court has to play?
Ropa, let me start off by saying that the court does not choose what cases come to it. So we deal with the cases that are lodged at the registrar's office. We have absolutely no say in what comes to the court. And I think the court's increasing involvement in politically loaded cases reflect its crucial role in safeguarding our democracy. And it also reflects the confidence that political parties and politicians and government might have in the court, that they can come to the court to settle something which they could possibly perhaps settle out of court. And in some instances even settle with legislation. But I think it shows a trust in the court. And in the past 30 years, I think the court has given direction, and that there's been even public confidence in the court in resolving some of those politically loaded issues in those cases. Politics is an emotional subject. And so when parties come to court in a politically loaded matter, there's going to be one side or that is not going to be happy with the decision.
Yes, in every case.
And because of our nation's interest and the people's interest in politics, there'll also be people, not just the parties, and the people who support or are members of particular parties who will not be happy with an outcome. And often when we parties to a matter or when we are so passionately involved in the matter, we can lose objectivity and we can blame the court to say the court should perhaps have reached another decision and maybe the court is biased and maybe judges on the court support a particular stance.
The court is captured.
Yes, and that's why we're getting the results that's coming out. So I think some discontent is to be expected, especially in political cases. And I think what it also shows, it shows that it's part of the transition to constitutional supremacy. So we moved from parliamentary supremacy to constitutional supremacy. And I think it's important in this change, because it empowers the judiciary, it empowers this court to safeguard constitutional rights, to ensure that that legislative and executive decisions are subject to judicial review. And it's important to note that our Constitution embodies the principle that everyone is equal before the law, including government officials, political leaders, and even the president. And I would hope that what can be seen from those types of cases is the enforcement of that rule, the enforcement that everybody is equal. And I think it also underscores the role of the Constitutional Court as the guardian of democracy. The court is there to impose checks and balances. And the court is there ultimately, even through these decisions that might appear or that are politically loaded, to strengthen our democratic framework. And I think that is also what we try to do in Economic Freedom Fighters.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You know, when I think of that question and the implications this has, I understand that it may exemplify confidence in the court.
Yes.
But are you also not concerned that some politicians are maybe abusing the court or using it to serve their own purposes? I think, for example, of the Zuma judgment that was delivered by Sisi Kampepe.
Yes.
That was then followed by those riots in KZN.
Yes.
Is the court not concerned about those kind of consequences?
You know, once, I want to tell a story, but I also want to say, when people start telling stories in response to questions, and you also know they're showing their age, because old people like to do that. When you ask a question, they like to tell a story. I was a very, very junior and naive advocate once upon a time in practicing in KZN in Durban. And I got urgent instructions. And, you know, as a junior attorney or advocate, when you get urgent instructions, you think this case is taking over your whole life. It's so important. There's nothing else more important than this case. And we went to the judge's house at 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
I wouldn't do that again now, unless it was really, really an emergency.
And you wouldn't want anyone at your house at 9 a.m.
No, yes. And one of the allegations that we had made in the papers, it was in relation to taxi strikes and taxi violence, was that, you know, if we don't get this interdict, the taxi people are not going to be happy, and, you know, they might put up blockades and create more lawlessness. And the judge said, how can that ever be a reason for granting relief? that people, if they don't get the relief they seek, they're going to resort to violence. How can that ever be a justification? And in my naivety, that was a justification that I offered at 9 o'clock at night for an urgent application. When this court hands down judgment, and the Constitution and the law guides the court to a particular decision, the court cannot shy away from giving a decision that is just, giving a decision that's demanded by the law and the Constitution, because it might be afraid of what people will do. That is not the rule of law. And if ever that happens, in any court, we should be concerned about the rule of law.
Absolutely. And I think that was mentioned in Makwenyane as well, right? The role of public opinion and it's not influencing the court.
Yes.
Yes. So during the transition of democracy, courts assumed a pivotal role in upholding democratic principles and protecting citizens' rights, including access to justice. However, the fulfillment of these rights for previously disadvantaged groups in South Africa has been criticized a lot. So I want to hear from you, Judge, how the court has, whether the court rather has sufficiently addressed such a concern about the rights of previously disadvantaged groups over the past 3 decades.
I will respond firstly by saying I recognize that for most of the people in South Africa, the rights that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights have not been realized. I must immediately highlight the significance of the Constitution and its role in achieving social justice. And in my view, it's one of our country's most prized possessions. The Constitution in the preamble, it recognizes the past injustices. And it declares that going forward, we will strive for social justice. We will live in a society where fundamental human rights are recognized. And it holds itself out, the Constitution holds itself out as the foundation of a society to be realized in the future. And I think nobody can doubt in South Africa that we have achieved a great deal over the past 3 decades, inside and outside of the courtroom, towards the fulfillment of these rights. We have come from a very dark past where a majority of South Africans, or the majority of South Africans, were deprived of basic rights. Yes, we still have a long way to go to achieve the vision of a just and equal society. We have one of the most unequal societies in the world in terms of division of wealth and access to opportunities. The vast majority of people in South Africa are living in poverty. Now, our Constitution recognizes that it needs to address this. It needs to secure and ensure that everyone lives in conditions that are compatible with human dignity. Human rights litigation plays a critical role in ensuring that socioeconomic rights are upheld. But everything is within limitations. And there's a duty on the state to protect, to promote the achievement of all the rights, the basic rights. But that is limited to available resources. And the court has assumed, and I don't think I'll say assumed, I think the Constitution gives us this role in upholding democratic principles and ensuring the realization of those fundamental rights. And it has, to the best of its ability, tried to fulfill this role in a number of judgments. I think I'll just mention 2. In Peko versus Ekurhuleni Metropolitan Municipality, concerned the right to housing. There, the Constitutional Court held that the municipality's forced removal and demolition of homes of the applicants in an informal settlement was unlawful. And the court went further. The court said the municipality had a duty to provide the occupants with temporary shelter and to engage with them meaningfully in identifying alternative land that was available. And in Juma Masjid, this was a case concerning the right to education. A private landowner sought the eviction of a public school, and the Constitutional Court safeguarded the right to education by requiring the state to engage with the private landowner and the school to resolve the dispute in the best interests of the children. Now, there are 3 arms of government, as I've said. The judiciary is one of those. The responsibility for the realization of all those rights lies across those 3 arms. And while the courts have and will continue to play a key role in the achievement of social justice, there are limitations. And as I've said before, we don't determine the cases. The content of the cases, the type of cases that come to us. When the cases come, we look at the Constitution, we look at the law, and we apply that. And that's our role. The other arms of government have different roles.
And in recent years, you have tried to sort of push other branches to,
Yes.
do their roles or play their role, and that's particularly through structural interdicts, which I'm a big
Yes.
fan of. I
Yes.
just wanted to put that out there. And speaking of previously disadvantaged groups, one particular group that stands out, and I'm sure this is a group very close to your hearts, are women, right? You are
Yes.
well known for your fierce defense of women's rights. I came across this when I was preparing for this interview during your JSC interviews in 2017. You were described as having an independent mindedness and a hard-nosed attitude to rape and gender-based violence in South Africa. And one of the cases that stand out for me is from your time at the Supreme Court of Appeal, S versus Nkomo, where you had to dissent against the majority, and you wrote a very strong dissent against the majority, which was which had using mitigating factors adduced by the rapist, reduced a life sentence for rape from life to 16 years imprisonment. And I'd like to quote something you said in that judgment. You said, against the backdrop of the unprecedented spate of rapes in this country, courts must be mindful of their duty to send out a clear message to potential rapists and to the community that they are determined to protect the equality, dignity, and freedom of all women. Judge, since this judgment at the SCA, not much has changed in our country in terms of GBV. There are high levels of crime and violence, which present a significant challenge to South Africa's democracy. My question to you is, what else can courts actually do to contribute to addressing these pervasive issues?
Yeah, I think it's undoubted, Ropa, that gender-based violence undermines the principles of dignity, equality, and freedom that our Constitution ensures for everybody. And it's in fact a factor that holds women back. It's a factor that affects the freedom, affects the advancement of women in our society. And the judiciary, as an arm of government, has the responsibility to ensure that justice is served in all cases, but also in the cases involving gross violation of human rights, like GBV cases, gender-based violence. And we can only strive that by interpreting the law and delivering justice in each and every such case that comes to us, we contribute to shaping the type of society we want to see, in shaping a society where the values of dignity and equality and freedom are realized. But the courts alone and the legislature cannot stem the tide of violence. You will note that the legislature has introduced legislation. It has introduced legislation to protect women more and to protect women and children and all victims of gender-based violence. Because you will recall, or you might not recall because you're so young, there was a time in our history where women did not get assistance, even from the police, even from the courts. They would say this is a family issue. It's a marital issue that must be sorted out at home. So we've moved from that, but and we have legislation that cures that. We have legislation that a woman is armed with to get an interdict, but an interdict has not prevented the woman from getting killed, from still getting assaulted. Or let me not just say women, although it's largely women, directed against women. And that shows that what we have is not enough. So it's not enough for the legislation and for the courts. We need a multifaceted approach. We need community engagement. We need more victim support, and we need education and comprehensive social programs. Who is raising these people to be perpetrators? We are raising them.
Yes.
So it's how are we raising our future generations? How are we raising our boy child? What are we doing wrong as a society?
Those are very good questions. Yeah.
And I think when we look at that, we will get more towards an answer that can stem this tide. Because the courts are giving increasingly heavier sentences. But is it working? The numbers, the statistics are increasing. So we need to do more.
I really like the questions you posed. That reminds me of something Justice Sisikampepe, I think it was, said in the Chabalala case, that we often frame rapists as monsters. We say these are monsters, but they're not monsters. They're fathers, uncles, sons, teachers, and we really need to
Yes.
reframe
Yes.
how we are viewing this.
Yes.
Still on the topic of gender equality, you have been on the bench for a very long time. You were a judge of the court of different courts. I think your experience must be over 25 years now, and now you're sitting on the bench of the Constitutional Court. And Justice, you have been very open about your experiences of racism and sexism early on in your career. And I just want to say it is very inspiring what you have accomplished, despite of all the obstacles you faced. And I also think we would love to hear, and I'm sure our viewers would also love to hear more about how you overcame these obstacles to achieve all the success you have in your career.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. When I started practicing as an advocate, the legal field and the legal fraternity was not the way it is today. You would know that under the previous government, brown people like me were classified as colored. I think I was the first colored woman to join the bar in Durban.
Wow.
And there was one colored male there at the time. And as a young person, young black woman going into this profession, I felt that I didn't really have people around me to support me in because you need so much support when you start out.
Absolutely.
And I was born and grew up in this area that had been classified for colored people in Wentworth. The people I knew were from Wentworth. I had no connections who would send me work. I didn't know those people because we just moved in different circles. It was a struggle for me to get articles when I finished my LLB. I could not get articles in Durban. I could not get articles in Joburg. If I say I applied to at least 100 firms, that's an understatement.
Wow.
I applied to more than that. Most of them I did not get a response from. Eventually, I managed to get articles in Durban with somebody, young attorney, who had not even been in practice for 3 years yet. And who had been in practice for 2.5 years. And as you may know, in order to take on a candidate attorney, your principal should have been in practice for 3 years. And that's the only firm that offered me articles. So for 6 months I worked in the law firm without my articles being registered. And it could only be registered after that. But the law profession at that stage was not welcoming towards women, and particularly black women. And I would say my results from university were, I think, generally acceptable. They were good enough to get me a Fulbright scholarship, but they were not good enough to get me articles with a big firm or an established practice, either in Durban or in Johannesburg. And I think that speaks volume for how the profession was at that time. When I was appointed as a judge, I was 32 years old. And at the High Court, they had restrooms for judges, and there was a male sign. And they had restrooms for secretaries, and there was a sign of a woman.
Wow.
And then and they were directly opposite each other. So I'd go there, look, judges, secretaries, where do I belong? And I thought, well, I'll go to the secretaries.
Yeah.
Don't want to give anybody a heart attack. And I never took that fight up.
Do you wish you had?
No. What I say to people is, choose your battles. In the bigger picture, it didn't matter which washroom I used, as long as there was a washroom that was available for me. I knew at that time, I knew I had bigger battles to fight. I was appointed as a judge to an unwelcoming bench. I was the first black woman to be appointed as a judge. So the jury was out, and everybody was waiting to see, can black women be judges? And I realized the responsibility that lay on my shoulders. That if I didn't rise to the occasion, I might adversely affect the women who come after me. Because at that time we were living in a world where judges were white and they were male. And yes, we were going through change, but there were many who resisted the change. And there were many, and I also say this, that I can understand that there were people who were against change because that was their socialization. They were brought up in a world, it was institutionalized in their minds that black people were good to be your domestic worker, good to be your driver, good to work in the factories.
The menial work.
Yes, they can be teachers, yes, but teachers for their people. There could be a few that could be doctors, but yes, in the townships, because that's what they were good enough. And so when I was appointed, and I was almost half the age of the other judges on the bench, it was difficult for me, and I realized it was difficult for them. In the world that they lived in, and the world that those judges had come from, people like me were not meant to be judges.
Wow.
That's how they were socialized. So those were the battles that I had to face. A senior judge, a leader of the judiciary at the time when I was appointed, was interviewed by the Sunday Tribune. And I'll never forget those words where he was criticizing my appointment.
Wow.
And then he ended off and he added, at least she's got potential.
Wow.
And that was the Sunday Tribune. It was published on the Sunday. And the Monday I was reporting to court. So the washrooms were the last and the least of my concerns.
Wow. Well, you have shattered glass ceilings, right? You are a glass ceiling shatterer, they say. I guess with all that experience, what I really want to know, and I'm sure our viewers want to know, how did you overcome all of that, Judge? What do you attribute, what do you say, this is how I got to the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land? How did you overcome that?
You know, there's a movie that is out. I'm going to the story again.
I love the stories, Judge.
It's called King Richard.
I love that movie. Yeah, it's a good one.
Venus tells the story of Venus and Serena. Before they were born, their father wrote out a plan for their lives and for the life that he envisaged for them. And in his plan, one of the goals for each of them was each of them would win Wimbledon. And Wimbledon is the most prestigious of all tennis tournaments. And he had that vision for his two daughters before they were born.
Wow.
And from the time they were born, he implemented that plan and that vision. And history speaks for itself. They say Serena is one of the greatest. I'm not familiar with all these things. GOAT.
The greatest of all
the
time.
greatest of all times.
Yes.
And that started with her father, Serena's father. And I think my journey that has led me to the Constitutional Court started with my parents, and especially my father. When I was 5 years old, my father tells me, and I don't have a recollection of this, or even before I was 5, I had some rag dolls, and I used to put them on a blanket outside on the grass, and I used to teach them. I tried teaching the children, but they wouldn't sit still long enough. And so when they ran away, I would teach my dolls. And then my father said that made him realize that there was something special about me. And at that stage, you could only be enrolled in school if you were 7 years old or if you were turning 7 before the 1st of July of that year. And my birthday is in November. So I would have had to wait 2 more years before I could go to school.
Wow.
My father sat me down and he said, my name is Leona, so they shortened it to the last part of my name. My family call me Ona. And I really like it. And people from my youth and from school, they call me Ona. And I like it. It like takes me away from being a judge. It just reminds me that this is just Ona. So my father said, and he still calls me Ona up to now. He said, Ona, I'm going to enroll you in school because you're ready. I'm going to change your birth certificate. So if they ask you at school, this is the year that you were born in, you have to remember that. The other thing, I'm going to send you to an Afrikaans school because the only university you can go to as a brown person in South Africa is in the Western Cape. And the main language spoken there, especially among brown people and probably at the university,
It's Afrikaans.
is Afrikaans. So my journey started when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
I had to remember that I was born in a different year and I had to learn to speak Afrikaans. I did not know Afrikaans as a language at that stage. My father comes from the Eastern Cape, so his family was Afrikaans speaking. But the Eastern Cape and Durban are so far apart that I think by that time, I'd visited his family once because it used to take us 3 days by train to travel from Durban to my dad's hometown. And I'd visited once, so I didn't have much exposure to Afrikaans. And so I believe that that's where my resilience, my tenacity, and my spirit came from there when I was 5 years old. And I had to go to this Afrikaans school and learn Afrikaans. And I was always 2 years younger than everybody in my class. So I had obstacles from then that I had to overcome. And I can only thank my parents for it now because whatever obstacle I had, I knew I could overcome. And I did not know what a university was, but I knew I'm going to university.
Wow.
From the age of 5 years old, I knew that I'm going to university. And that was the plan. And there was never a prospect that I would not go to university. And that's where it started.
That's really amazing, Judge. I'm so sorry to keep going back to this question, but there's just so many dimensions to it. One of the things that I learned after former Justice Mokgoro passed on, you talked a lot about her influence on your career. So as we speak about you overcoming obstacles, I'd really like to hear more about the woman who shaped your career.
Yes. I have to say that it started with my mother and my grandmother. And just on the radio, there I'm going to a story again. They asked somebody, who would you like to have dinner with? And I thought about that and I thought, oh, my grandmother. My grandmother was Mam Charlie. And she was living in Umlazi. Now, if you know Durban, you would know that Umlazi was a township
Yes.
for what was classified as African people. And Wentworth was its township for people that were classified as colored. My grandmother looked at Wentworth and she thought, you know what? Umlazi is not the best, but the schools in Wentworth and the homes in Wentworth are a little bit better. And she was classified as African by the then apartheid government. Then we had the 4 classifications of white, African, Indian, and colored. She got herself and her husband and her children reclassified as colored.
Wow.
And I would like the opportunity to ask her, how did she do that? And I think that also changed my family's trajectory in the opportunities then that were available to them, although it wasn't much. And I think in Wentworth, I think we must have been the poorest people there.
Wow.
I can remember we had the most long-suffering neighbor. And my grandmother would send us, go ask Auntie Sophie for an onion. And we'd always borrow. I can never remember us taking it back. Go ask Auntie Sophie, please, to borrow us a tomato.
Oh, wow.
And Auntie Sylvie never ever complained.
Oh, bless Auntie
Yeah.
Sylvie.
So I think even, you know, when they say the poorest amongst the poor, the people in
Yes.
Wentworth were poor. But I think we were even poorer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and then the other woman would definitely be my mother. And my mother is one of 8 children. And she was the second eldest. And she was the eldest girl. So when she got to standard 8, which is be grade 10, she got a school leaving certificate and she had to leave to earn an income to help with the others who were still in school. And once again, my grandmother was an entrepreneurial woman. She had a job as I don't want to use the term maid, at the hotel as a cleaning lady at the hotel. She had another job doing sewing. And so she got my mother to do all of that. Eventually, my mother was doing hairdressing as well. Where she learnt it, I don't know, but I know she was doing hairdressing. And then my mother was making fudge and selling fudge at home and crunchies. And I was smart enough to learn from my mother how to do that.
Yeah, I heard you had a switch making
Yes,
business.
and then I said, no, this could be profitable. And I took over the business from my mother when she went into full-time employment. So my mother had that little home industry whenever my father would be unemployed. Because my father at the time was a carpenter in the building industry. And they weren't employed permanently. They would be employed if there's a construction going on. As soon as that building is done, they'd be without work. Somebody else, something there, yeah, oh, there's something coming up there, then they're all there.
Yeah.
And when the economy was very bad in the 70s, there'd be long periods that he would not work. And that's when my mother started this home industries business. Let me fast forward to when I got the Fulbright scholarship. That same year, Justice Maya, now our Chief Justice,
Yes.
and the late Justice Yvonne Magoro also got scholarships.
Oh, wow.
So the 3 of us met in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University. As part of the induction, we all spent 3 weeks in Washington, D.C. before we went to our separate universities. And that was more than 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
that the three of us met. And we've stayed in contact with each other since then. And even when we were in the US, Justice Maphosa was a little older than us. She was married. She had children already. We were youngsters. And it's almost like we were set loose on the world for the first time. And there were many occasions where she had to rein us in. And I think Justice Maya spoke about that also at her memorial service, that she would rein us in and say, ladies, this is what we're here for. And remind us of what we were there to achieve. And she never stopped playing that role, because then we came back and she was the first one. She was one of the first judges. She was appointed to this court. Yes. And even from this distance and from this height, she oversaw us.
Wow.
And she said, okay, yeah, this is what you'll need to do now. I was one of the 6 people who were the founding members of the South African chapter of the International Association of Women Judges. And it was Justice Maphosa who said, Leona, it's time for this organization to be established here in South Africa. You'll need to go. There's a conference in Uganda. You'll need to go to Uganda, speak to the judges there, the women judges, and come back and set up this association here.
Wow. Amazing. We actually met with Judge Victor yesterday, who was also the vice president of the same organization. It's really beautiful to hear about this beautiful community you have created. So speaking of career advice, you had amazing women mentoring you. What advice do you now have, not just for lawyers, but for young people in South Africa?
They need to have a vision. They need to have a plan. And as I mentioned with King Richard, he had a plan for his daughters, even before they were born. My parents had a vision for me. And it doesn't have to start before you were born. It doesn't have to start when you're 5 years old. Although it's easier when that happens and you are just set on the course. But if you're not, even as a young person who is going to university, young person who has just graduated, have a plan. Have a plan and execute the plan. And don't be afraid of hard work. Don't be fooled that things come easy. I have children of my own, and some of them don't want to work too hard. No. We need a life balance. We need to do this. We need to do that. What do they call them? Is it the Zen Gs or what is it?
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Very big on mental health.
Yes. I have a daughter, qualified lawyer, who says, no, practice is not for me. And then she'll say, my friends are working so hard. She won't say her mother, but she's saying her mother too. I don't want that life for myself. And she's doing far more interesting things. So, if you don't have a lot of money, your parents don't have a lot of money, you're not millionaires and billionaires, you're going to have to work hard. It's not going to come easy. Yes, you can hear about somebody who sat and developed an app or something and then
dropped out of school.
Yes, and a big company bought it for I don't know how many millions. But how many stories are there like that? But there's so many more stories like mine of people who literally have come from nothing and made something out of their lives. And you cannot do that without hard work and without making sacrifices. And when I speak to young people, older people, I say, you need to know what season you are in your life. And the Bible says there's a time to sow, there's a time to reap, there's a time to cry, there's a time for joy. Now, if you're a farmer and you want to plant in the season that you are meant to reap, it's not going to work. When you are in school, that's the time for studies. That's the time you got to devote to your work. That's not the time where you're going to go be finding yourself or doing whatever, ever. So you must know what season of your life you are in. When you're doing articles, as a candidate attorney, you must know now is the time for me to learn everything I can about this profession, to do my articles, and to make sure that I pass the board exams. So you need to identify your season. And always, always work hard. Always give more. And if your boss asks you to do something, don't say, that's actually not in my job description. Unless it's something really weird when they want to say you must go to the moon or something like that. But, and that's the kind of attitude that is going to take you far in life. And if there's one lesson people can take from my story, is that I am an ordinary person who has achieved the extraordinary. There's no secret to my success. It's simply about hard work, about having goals and about achieving them. And it's about getting up when you fall down. I have fallen down so many times, sometimes even publicly, and I've gotten up. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here where I am today.
Wow, so much to take from that, Judge. I'm going to ask one question because I don't know when I'll see you next, and this is more for me than for anyone else. As young female lawyers, you spoke about balance. How do you strike that balance between, say, family and career? Because, as women, you're expected to show up heavily for family.
Yes.
How did you do that balance?
It's difficult. And I don't quite think you ever achieve that perfect balance. What I do know is that I've had to make adjustments in my life. And when my children were small, from the time I got back from chambers as an advocate, or from I got back from court, until after dinner, that was family time. And the work that I had to do, I would do thereafter. I would do after we've had dinner, after they've done homework, and that's when I would do the work that I needed to do. And I think we all need to find ways to make what we're doing work in our lives. That was what worked for me, so that I didn't miss that family time with the children. And they say it takes a village to raise a child.
That's true.
And I had a village. I had my husband, I had my parents, even uncles and aunts. So, and everybody had their duties. And my parents and my uncle and aunts, they loved it.
Yeah.
To be with the children, they would know Monday, this one is picking up, Tuesday, that one is picking up.
Yeah.
And we were able to get our children to go to a good school. Just like I believed we were the poorest in Wentworth, my children believed they were the poorest in that school.
Oh, man. History repeats itself.
Yes. And my dad had a car, his car. My uncle had a car, his car. Maybe battered and bruised. One door not opening. The children had to climb into the back.
But it got the job done.
And because my father was retired, the uncle was retired, they'd be the first ones at the school. So the parents normally make a line with the cars. That's the mums usually.
Yes.
So they would come, and first in line would be this battered car of their grandfather or of their great uncle. So it wasn't always, the kids weren't always amused when they got older.
Yes.
They will say to them, Grandpa, you need to go right to the school. You can just drop me here.
Wow.
So you see they and then they would lament the fact that mom and dad is not able to come and pick
Pick
them
them
up
up,
in
yes.
proper cars. At one stage, we even had a kumbi, but the door for the kumbi was
Yes.
broken.
Oh my.
So my father or the uncle would park again right in front. Children are coming down the steps, and what they would do, they'd take the kumbi door off and put it on the side
Oh
until the
wow.
kids are in the car, then take the kumbi door off and put it on again.
Wow.
So I think if you have to ask the children, they would
Yeah.
say, I really wish my parents, my mother would come pick me up at school like
Yes.
other children's mothers.
Yes. But that's one of the sacrifice you spoke of. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
All right. Just some final remarks, Judge. Looking at the next 30 years, we've been talking about the past 30 years, right? But we've got a future to look forward to. What measures can be implemented in the next 3 decades to continue advancing democracy in our country?
I think to continue advancing democracy over the next 30 years, next 3 decades, and beyond, we need a comprehensive approach to address issues of governance, social justice, economic inequality, and institutional reform. We must continue to strengthen the rule of law, the independence of the courts, the independence of the judiciary. We must protect and advance our constitution. We must strive to reduce inequality. We must promote more actively, I think, and at a realistic level, the achievement of socioeconomic rights. We must invest in education. We must invest in empowerment of our youth, training, skills upgrade. We must focus on economic growth, because when our economy is growing, so many other areas will improve. There will be more access to employment, access to services, and our policy, all policies must be effective to realize goals. And when I speak about goals, I think as government also, our government needs to have realistic goals and plans to meet those goals. We spoke about high crime rates, so policing needs to be effective. We need to invest in maintaining our infrastructure so we don't have the water problems and the power problems that we've been plagued with for the past few years. Fingers crossed. We don't have it right now, touch wood. Service delivery on the ground needs to improve. Municipalities need to function better. That's the first port of call for citizens, is the municipalities, it's local government. And every year, when the Auditor General gives a report, it's a dim report on how municipalities are functioning. Most of them are dysfunctional. A lot of them are insolvent. We just need better run institutions. And when the institutions, those small institutions at every level, local, provincial, national, work better, our society is going to be better.
Absolutely. Beautiful. I think we'll end on that note. Just thank you so much
It's a
for
pleasure.
taking the time. We've
It's a
learned so
pleasure.
much. We enjoyed the stories. I could sit all day and listen to your stories, but you have a very important job to get back to. Thank you so much. It's been an honor reflecting
Yes,
on 30
yes.
years of democracy with you.